So what happens with Dyfs is you saw that mandatory reporting statute. So when someone calls it in, when a neighbor calls in that she saw the mother passed out drunk in the backyard and the children were walking around in their Pampers with poop in their Pampers, and the mother couldn't even speak clearly and coherently, when the neighbor sees that and calls Dyfs, anonymously perhaps because they don't want any blowback, they don't want any problems with the neighbor, or they called in because they want to call in without anonymity. When that gets called into Dyfs, what we call Dcpp and P, I use those terms interchangeably, it's called into central screening in Trenton. So if that woman who's passed out drunk in the yard and the kids are walking around in their Pampers that are soiled, and they live near a railroad tracks, I'll add even more potential harm, right? They live near a railroad tracks. Let's say that happened in Scotch Plains, New Jersey. Well, it doesn't get called into Union County Dyfs. It gets called into what we call central screening in Trenton. And there are arguments both sides whether that should be called in locally, but it's not. You have highly trained people in Trenton who listen to the allegation. The neighbor calls them. They have papers that they fill out, right? They identify what the level of risk is to the children. And if the neighbor saw this 20 minutes ago, it's a high risk. Dyfs has to go out immediately. So the screener in Trenton takes down the information, and that information is then analyzed for whether it is an immediate response case. Then that information goes from these trained screeners. They call them screeners because they screen the information, and it gets sent to Union County Dyfs. It starts in Trenton, and then it goes to Union County, where the municipality of Scotch Plains is located. And in my hypothetical, the woman's passed out drunk in her backyard in Scotch Plains, okay? So now it has to be investigated. Because it's immediate danger, the Dyfs worker, the Dcpp worker will have to go out immediately. But before he goes out, he will have a conference with his supervisor. And the Dyfs supervisor and the worker will decide, how do we best approach this? If the woman's drunk, do we take her to Trinitas Hospital? Or do we try to get her an emergency room admission through the ambulance? How do we handle this, right? Is this family known to us in the past? The woman that's passed out drunk, has she been passed out drunk before? You know what they do? They look in the Dyfs computer. And if there was a prior referral about this woman and this family, the worker who's going out to investigate ought to know that, right? So they look up the case, they talk to their supervisor about it, and they figure out a strategy for going there. And if the worker feels that they're in danger, if it's an area that there have been a series of shootings in, or it's an area where there's potential for harm based upon prior Dyfs visits, if there's an articulable reason why the worker feels unsafe, then the police will go with him or her just to escort them. We try not to have the police go out because this isn't a law enforcement thing. It's a family protection thing. And Dyfs is in the social work business, not the criminal prosecution business. But if they feel unsafe, the worker, then the worker gets to go out with a police officer. And that's okay. And the system is built for that. Now, when they get there, if mom is still passed out drunk on a hammock and there's empty bottles on the ground in her yard, well, then Dyfs has to do what they call a DOD, D-O-D-D, an immediate removal. The only reason it's called a DOD, a D-O-D-D, is because Senator Dodd from New Jersey, Frank Dodd, he's now deceased. Frank Dodd was a senator from Orange, New Jersey. In fact, when I was a kid, he owned a bar called Dodd's in Orange, where I had a cocktail or two. Back in the day when I was over 21. You had to be over 18, actually. Frank Dodd not only was a business owner, he was a state senator who cared about kids. And he passed a law that allowed Dyfs to take away children immediately without going to court when they're in serious danger. And let me tell you, if you got a couple of preschoolers walking around with soiled Pampers and a mother's drunk with bottles laying on the ground and they live near the train tracks, I think you're in good shape by taking those kids without a court order. But that's not the rule. The rule is you have to go to court and ask the judge to remove the kids or put the kids in a safer place unless there's an immediate danger and it's really serious. And in my hypothetical I just described to you, I think we could say that that's a serious situation where you need immediate intervention and there's no time to go to court. That's what a DOD is. And by DOD, I mean is Dyfs will go in and they'll take those kids. They'll bring another worker there and they'll put them in their car and they'll figure out where to go. They may go to a temporary shelter for a little bit. What they want to try to do is put those children in with kin temporarily for now. By kin, I mean put them in with grandma or auntie or somebody who's known to the family. They may even be able to wake up mom and snap her out of it. No, take my kids. No, we have to. We want to help you. We're going to get you to a detox, whatever. Mom, I want my kids. Man, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But tell us where we could bring them. We don't want to put them in a foster home if we don't have to. Is your mother around, your father, your uncle, your aunt? Where can we put them with people that are related to you? And if we put them, well, I don't have any kin, but my neighbor Matilda is sweet. She works for the city of Clifton. She's worked there for 20 years. She's a solid lady. Okay, mom, we'll check her out. Now, Matilda, Dyfs is going to have to see, is she known to them? Is she in a central registry? Does she have a criminal record? They have to vet, what they call vet, check out this person. And maybe we can't find kin or relatives to put the two children who are roaming the yard near the railroad tracks because their mother is drunk, unconscious. We can't find grandma or auntie or kin. That's the first place we look to put kids. The second place we look in is a trusted family friend. And the last place, unfortunately, is a family who's already been examined and vetted, and they take in children. They foster children. That is the foster placement system. And, that's the last thing you want to do because the kids don't know those people. The hope is that they know grandma or auntie or they know the neighbor Matilda because we want to cause the least amount of harm to protect those children. Sadly, in many cases, they go to a foster placement. And most of those foster placements are good people. They're noble people. They're trying to do the right thing. They're giving back. And while it's not ideal for the children, it's better than getting run over by a train or, wandering off into the street or being kidnapped, right? So sometimes kids have to go to foster placement. Now, remember, this was an emergency removal. The reason that Frank Dodd passed the Dodd law, D-O-D-D, was because he realized that sometimes kids are in such danger that Dyfs has to come in and remove those children and put them in a safe place without asking a judge. And in our law, you just can't seize people or cars or property without going to court. It has to be a real emergency. And the law does provide for emergencies. And Dodd passed a law that said where there's emergencies, Dyfs can go remove the kids immediately without going to court. But then two things have to happen, students. One is that they have to go to court the next day within a certain amount of hours. It's almost always the next day within 24 hours. So if you took the kids at 2 p.m, 9 o'clock the next morning, you got to get before a judge. And the only issue before the judge is, did Dyfs make the right call yesterday? Not whether the children are in fact abused or whether they're in danger. That's for another day. Did Dyfs make the right call yesterday? So within 24 hours, if those children are removed, you got to get before a judge, a neutral judge. And then Dyfs, through what's called a deputy attorney general, goes before the judge and they say, listen, we got a call. We went there. She was drop dead drunk. She's laying in a hammock. She couldn't even speak. Empty bottles. They're by railroad tracks. The kids are preschoolers, 4 and 3. Their Pampers are soiled. We decided to take them. The judge will say, all right. The mother might even be there by then. She might have sobered up. All right, ma'am, for the time being, we're going to keep the kids in the foster placement or with grandma or with Ms. Matilda. And we're going to come back to court within whatever it is, 10 days. And then you can be heard on whether there actually was abuse or neglect. So the hearing that occurs 24 hours later is only about whether Dyfs removed the kids during the emergency the right way. Whether the kids are in fact in danger will happen within 10 days. Now, one thing that I left out was when Dyfs takes the kids and they decide there's going to be a hearing within 24 hours before a judge, they got to give the mother notice. Say, hey, ma'am, if she's competent, even if she's not competent, you leave it under the door or you staple it, you scotch tape it to the back door. You put it in her hand. You stick it under her hammock if she's drop dead drunk. But you wouldn't do that. You call the emergency room anyway to get her out of there. But you give it to the doctors. You give a notice that says tomorrow we're in court to decide whether taking your kids was a good idea. That's not the way it's written, but that's the thrust of this notice. So mom could conceivably show up in court 24 hours later. But she will have her entire case heard within 10 days. The only issue the next morning is, did Dyfs make the correct decision when they removed the kids the evening before? Was the kid truly in danger? Were the kids truly in danger? And did Dyfs have to remove them? If they're wrong, the kids get returned. It's very rare because Dyfs doesn't like removing kids, despite what the public thinks. Dyfs is not in the baby snatching business. They're really not. They'd rather not remove kids. Believe me, it's a major issue when you remove kids, and you would like to avoid it at all costs. And we talked about that early in this class. So lastly, I leave you with this. When they come back 10 days later, most of the time the mother will cooperate with Dyfs. If they don't cooperate and say, I wasn't drunk, I was just sleeping, or as my dad used to say, I was resting my eyes, that's your position, then you get a trial. You get a trial. The kids will still stay in foster care, but you'll get a trial and they'll decide whether the children were neglected. This would be a neglect case because she didn't do anything affirmative. She didn't hit them or burn them or hurt them. She was neglectful. The worst kind of neglect where those children could have died. So when they come back 10 days later, the mom could say, you know what, I did mess up. I got an alcohol problem. I'm going to go to a 30-day detox. Can I have visitation with my kids? That's almost always what happens because Dyfs has usually got a good case. And if they don't, or the parents, sadly, it's usually people with wealth who fight these things, and poor people don't have the access to lawyers. They do get a free lawyer, so people who are poor or people who don't have means get a free lawyer, which is good, and they're really good. But you know, the lawyers who work for the Office of Parental Representation know that you're probably going to lose that trial, so you might as well settle now. But if some parent wants a trial, that's going to happen later, a few weeks later. So kids are removed. You're in court within 24 hours to decide whether they were removed properly. 10 days later, you come back to court, if you're the mom, to dispute whether they should be removed if you want. Most moms don't dispute. It's not only moms, parents, grandparents, dads. Most people do not dispute Dyfs's conduct. They cooperate and say, listen, I know I was drunk that day. It only happened once, whatever. What do I need to do to get my kids back? Because they know that Dyfs has most of the cards, and they're guilty most of the time. Not guilty. They're neglectful. Guilty sounds like a criminal word. They're neglectful. So that is Dyfs from the lady who calls through central screening to Union County, to the supervisor who meets with the worker, to the worker who brings the cop. They go out, they find the mother drunk, they remove the kids, they decide whether it goes with the kin, if they could find kin, or it goes with the neighbor, if they could find a neighbor, or they go to foster care, if worst case scenario. Then 24 hours later, they go back to the court. They go to the court for the first time to decide whether they did the right thing. The judge usually agrees they did the right thing because they did do the right thing. And then 10 days later, the lady and the mother will be back in court with Dyfs, and they try to figure out what to do next. Most moms cooperate. Most dads cooperate. If they don't, then within 30 days, they get a big trial, like a court trial. No jury, the judge makes the decision. I went a little over, 2 minutes over. Thank you for your indulgence. Those of you stayed, 32 of you, thank you. Any questions before we part?